Let us examine what is said by Dr. Alvin Young about the ester n-butyl ester making orange orange. Dr. Alvin Young wrote this report series number 12 under VA contract, Investigation into Tactical and Commercial Herbicides in 2013. Let's take a look at what he said. Notice on the disclaimer for VA reports, the conclusions reached in this report are based upon a comprehensive review of the historical records maintained in the publicly available files of the National Archives and Record Administration and other archival repositories. However, the conclusions reached do not necessarily represent those of the Department of Veterans Affairs or any other department or agency of the United States government. Yet they use his reports to deny us. This report is part of the Agent Orange Investigative Report series and should be considered as an amendable or living document. If additional authenticated documents or records are found that address the topic of this report, a re-evaluation of the conclusions may be necessary. On the last paragraph of this letter that Dr. Young writes, he says the selection of commercial herbicides and their recommendations for use on military installations was the responsibility of the Armed Forces Pest Control Board, while tactical herbicides were the responsibility of the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. That's fine. However, the herbicide orange was in the federal catalog and could be used on any federal facility. Dr. Young says here that commercial applicators would never have selected the n-butyl ester formulation of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T for weed or brush control because of the problems associated with volatility and drift. I would think that somebody with his experience working with the USDA, the Air Force, the DoD, would know about the Farmer's Bulletin in 1962 about using these herbicides effectively by the farmers. And inside the USDA pamphlet, we can see that 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T, Silvex, and many other chemicals were used. This was issued in May of 1962 and revised in 1971. Under the directives of 5154.12 and 4150.7, the Department of Defense gave the Armed Forces Pest Control Board, the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, the authority to set pest management policy applicable for all Department of Defense pest management activities in any unit at any time in any place, even when conducted by contract operations. He says here on this report, lastly, the implication that any mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T could be called Agent Orange is incorrect. The butyl formulations were not commercially available, says Dr. Young. Again, I would think someone of his caliber would know about the FCPC reporting each year on the production and sales of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. It lists here in 1955 through 1957 the 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T and the n-butyl ester, the isooctyl ester, the isopropyl ester, and all other esters were available 1955 to 1957 and sold around the world. I would think that he would at least go through the USDA registrations and make sure that the n-butyl ester was not federally registered to use. Here we have Weed Destroy 2,4,5-T ester 4, and it was registered in 1963 and canceled in 1983. And as you see, it has the butyl ester in the 2,4,5-T. The butyl ester, which Alvin Young said made orange orange. And here we have the registration of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T butyl esters, high volatile brush killer. In 1956 it was registered and canceled in 1983. As you can see, the n-butyl ester the n-butyl ester stands for normal butyl ester, and butyl ester is synonymous with n-butyl ester. In fact, n-butyl ester, phenyl ester was reported upon by the Journal of American Chemistry as early as 1933. So for Dr. Young to say that n-butyl ester was not used commercially by anyone is just misinformation. This is a report on 2,4,5-T to the President's Science Advisory Committee, Executive Office of the President in March 1971 on 2,4,5-T. On page 2 of the presidential report, it says, in considering the chemistry of 2,4,5-T, our attention was drawn to the impurities which can result from the manufacturing process. Particular attention was focused on a single impurity, 2378 tetrachlorodibenzo P-dioxin, which occurs in commercial preparations of the herbicide in highly variable amounts, unless particular care is taken to exclude it. This impurity is extremely toxic. Its amount depends upon variations in the reaction conditions. Other dioxins can be formed from various impurities in the starting materials. The dioxin impurity came to particular attention when the U.S. herbicide industry was asked to produce larger quantities of 2,4,5-T during the middle 1960s. However, its presence as an impurity and certain of its acute toxic effects had been known since 1957. Its concentration in commercial 2,4,5-T has been greatly reduced in the past year or so. And remember, this report was written in 1971. On page 10 of the presidential report in 1971, under chemistry, the summary 2,4,5 tetrachlorophenyloxyacetic acid is produced commercially, get that, by a process which begins with tetrachlorobenzene as a starting material. Technical grade 2,4,5-T is 90 to 92% pure acid. One of the important impurities, a polychlorinated dioxin, results both from impurities in the starting material and as side products of the desired reaction. A large number of esters and amine salts of the 2,4,5-T have been developed, as well as a variety of formulations in order to derive specific properties of volatility and solubility. About one half of the total production can be accounted for by the 2,4,5-T acid and its n-butyl ester. On page 23 of the presidential report, it says 2,4,5-T is slowly degraded in soil which contains organic matter under warm, moist conditions. Boy, that sounds like Panama. The generally accepted half-life for this process is several weeks. This is on page 32 of the President's report. This is to the executive office. This is, the very top of our government. It says in here that the military uses of 2,4,5-T. The phrase military uses refers to the employment of 2,4,5-T as a defoliant in operations. Basic research on herbicides proceeded through the period 1941 to 1947. So, the employment of 2,4,5-T as a defoliant in operations says nothing about tactical herbicides. This is a memorandum put out by the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, who were responsible for receiving the request from the facilities and making it happen. And they talk about the federal stock catalog and the standard pesticides that are in the federal stock catalog. And as we see on page 2 from the Federal Pesticide Review people, that anything that was in the federal catalog was a standard item to be used on any federal facility. As we see in the federal catalog up until 1971, in the chemicals section, we see that herbicide orange was listed in the federal stock catalog to be used by any federal facility up until 1971. As we see in Dr. Young's report about the Agent Orange Act of 1991, it says that by the very nature of the title of Agent Orange Act of 1991, it was at a minimum directed at the two components of Agent Orange, the phenoxy herbicides 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, and the dioxin contaminant, TCDD. Specifically in Section 2, General of the Agent Orange Act of 1991, Public Law 102-4, it notes, quote, a presumption of service connection for diseases associated with exposure to certain herbicide agent, end quote. Under Section 2, subsection 1C3, quote, a veteran shall be presumed to have been exposed to a herbicide agent containing dioxin or 2,4-D or other chemical compound in a herbicide agent. Under Section 2, subsection 1C4, it states, quote, for purposes of this section, the term herbicide agent means a chemical in a herbicide used in support of the United States and allied military operations in the Republic of Vietnam during the Vietnam era. As you can clearly see, the same item, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, was shipped to Vietnam and Panama over the decades. The problem is the government says they don't have any record of it and that what we were exposed to was not anything that was harmful, which is totally incorrect. So where does that leave us? We need to organize and we need to get this new bill that's going to be introduced into Congress done this Congress so we don't have to start again in 2 years. The VA Secretary has agreed with the research that it should be on the list, but apparently he has not acted and put it on the list. I don't know why and how things work, but apparently there's no policy time limit for him to do so. The Thailand veterans were in the same boat for 4 years before they got included in the PACT Act. It's unfortunate that Panama was not included in the PACT Act, but we're going to get it done. So go to my website and get registered and let's do it.